Let's unravel Geeta's world. Hello and welcome. This is the 93rd episode of Geeta's World, and we are literally inside Geeta's world because this is a place where India Today Global. This is the newsroom for India Today Global, which Geeta Mohan heads.
We just launched India Today Global, so that's a good way to start.
Yeah, and
she's now in my world.
literally, metaphorically,
so.
yes. But this reiterates the idea, Geeta, that podcast can be recorded anywhere and everywhere.
Absolutely.
You just need two mics and voila.
Yes. And a team.
Yeah,
And
of
a
course,
team.
Of course, we can't forget the team behind the camera. But today, we have like a very interesting topic to deal with, which is Modi 3.0, the foreign policy under Modi 3.0, which we'll discuss. And many of you would be aware that the Indian elections have been concluded, and not much of a brainer because Narendra Modi has clinched the third term. But this is a coalition government. This is not a brute majority that Prime Minister Modi has come with. And his BJP-led NDA, which is National Democratic Alliance, has emerged victorious. But this is also like a reminder that the opposition is strong.
Opposition exists as well.
Yeah.
I can't say whether if it's strong or not. It's there. It's in a significant number.
Right. Yeah. So, that's the reason I said this because that, when in the due course of our conversation, when we'll try to analyze foreign policy, I think this factor that the opposition exists will also help determine foreign policy, which I think I'll be able to understand from you better, right? And also the ministers of the Modi cabinet took oath this Sunday, and the ministers were given the respective ministries, and S. Jaishankar has retained the External Affairs Ministry. So this episode will try to analyze how India's foreign policy would look under Modi 3.0, what Prime Minister Modi's priorities be, how a humbled victory this time, running with a coalition government, will impact how the world views Prime Minister Modi and India. Let's first discuss, first a little bit of focus on media projection, which I think we touched upon in the previous episode. Geeta, so Indian elections were probably the most closely watched national elections this year. Reading the headlines about how some of the most, prominent foreign media houses, like some of the most, reputed headlines reported about the election results, reinforces the belief that so many so-called, liberals had in India about this being like a make or break election for Indian democracy. Because if the BJP had won a brute majority here, we know the things that were or probably still are in the agenda, like, for example, the Uniform Civil Code, One Nation, One Election, a delimitation exercise that will vastly reduce the number of seats from South Indians in Parliament. So it just so happens that with this kind of coalition, NDA government, these items on the BJP's agenda will be very hard to push through in the new parliament with a strong opposition, with an existing opposition. The foreign media also picked up on this sentiment, which was reflected in their headlines, where they used phrases like the election results humbling Modi, cutting him down to size, or leaving him at the mercy of Muslim-friendly allies. I think Dawn reported it. So it tells you how the world was seeing this election. So this brings to my, question. How is Modi 3.2 going to move forward with this kind of reputation in foreign media, where he is being labeled as an autocrat? Like, suppose his credentials as the PM of a secular, socialist, democratic country are being called into question, with people writing this was like a make or break election. So what does this do for India's credentials as a mother of democracy?
Well, to begin with, it's an important day that we're going to publish our podcast, which is when the External Affairs Minister has just assumed charge today. And he spelled out the agenda for India, acknowledged the challenges ahead when it comes to China, Pakistan. We've just seen the terror attack. But the larger question of what this government represented, the criticism it faced, and how it's going to move forward. I do think that foreign policy, Anna, is a continuum.
Right.
Even from UPA to NDA, there have been maybe a few things that were infused into the diplomacy that were maybe a move or a shift away from the traditional diplomacy that India followed, which certainly has to do with maybe getting a lot of religion in promoting Hinduism. Promoting yoga culture is a different aspect altogether, but that aspect. And then, of course, we've seen a lot of criticism of incidents that take place in India. Although I can reiterate saying that it is nobody's business to interfere in India's internal affairs. Having said that, the response is more important. When a country is criticized for something, there has to be acknowledgement that yes, this happened. You're nobody to say it. I will rectify it and rectify it, rather than saying, "Look at what is happening in your country." That is not the response to acknowledging incidents in your own country. I mean, you can tell them not to preach, you can tell them not to teach, but you can also acknowledge that yes, indeed, this has happened, rather than saying that, but do you know how many this community gets affected? Do you know how many that community gets affected? We're talking about incidents over here. So there has to be an acknowledgement. I think with the coalition government, this kind of an agenda will certainly in India's foreign policy take a backseat.
Right.
And the mandate that this government has come with clearly shows that it's the deliverables that are more important than the frills of religion, and I'm not here trying to denigrate it. It's a personal choice. It cannot be an imposition on any person, any country, any nation, or a peoples of a nation. So I think that certainly is an understanding, and that's certainly something that this administration will be looking at. With the coalition, it doesn't seem like this would be the primary agenda, but there are a lot of other areas where we've seen where there are challenges that they'll have to deal with, achievements that they can take forward and bring some more, take India to a different level altogether. And then there are promises that were made, and let's see whether they'll be kept or not.
Yeah, like especially because Modi has promised a new chapter of big decisions for India. So what big decisions regarding India's foreign policy can we anticipate? I think we'll also understand that. But just staying back on the point that you made regarding the response to foreign media and the response to yes, you don't have to interfere in India's internal matter. Just a quick point, Geeta, that Modi and his government, I mean, if you see over the past 10 years, they have been obviously like really, cognizant and vigilant about what foreign media is saying about India and the Indian government both. And, there were these routine instances where whether it be your press freedom or human rights or income inequality, whenever something negative was being published about India, union ministers, they would host press conferences to rubbish those claims. For example, they would be published in The Guardian or NYT or whatever. And during the elections also, if you remember, even US officials, they commented about Kejriwal's arrest. And obviously, as Jaishankar, he rubbished those concerns. But now that, Modi has managed to return to power with a very fractured kind of a mandate, how do you think Modi 3.0 would deal with these questions of press freedom, on human rights and so on? Because the opposition is not, I'm assuming, is not going to, let up now. There will be more scrutiny of what he says now.
It's a good thing, right? And it's not about whether if there was press freedom or not, or curtailment. It's about the fact that here the opposition will be playing the role that it should have played, that there should have been that space for an opposition to play that role of questioning, of seeking answers. It is our job to ask questions, and and we should be protected under press freedom to be allowed to ask those questions. So I suppose there was a lot of criticism of how press was being handled in India by many across the globe. We might see a reduced criticism of the government on that front, not because of anything else, but because maybe they'll see less of those instances.
Right.
And I'm not saying that people have not been brave enough and bold enough to write or to speak truth to power. There have been. But it's about the ramifications of speaking truth to power, which is what curtailment of press freedom is. That could there be laws, rules where anything that is against a government would be considered anti-national or seditionist.
Yeah.
That certainly is, had become a problem. But I think to a large extent, the country has shown that, and the press people now, that we will continue to ask questions, that we should continue to ask questions.
Yeah.
And there will certainly be not less, I think, but more scrutiny now, because back then when they were scrutinizing, they were just reporting on, okay, curtailment. Now they'll see whether if there is, why is there, and is there also self-censorship.
Yeah, right. Also, like, moving on from, foreign media and media representation, just a quick note, as like S. Jaishankar has been retained as the Ministry of External Affairs. So I was just thinking, like you have said, foreign policy works in the continuum. So how important is it to have like the same minister, in context of maneuvering foreign policy? How important is it to have like the same minister handling a specific ministry? How does the world see it? And I think
no, it's very important. Not because the same minister is continuing, Anna, because that it is about who is continuing. Now, Jaishankar is somebody for whom who's actually grown up in that building.
Yeah.
It's not unfamiliar territory. From a young officer in South Block to where he is today, taking that plunge from being a diplomat to becoming a politician, he knows the inside out of Indian diplomacy. Does it always serve in India's interest? We'll have to see how the policies have really panned out for India, and we will be discussing that. But the continuum over here is that there's a comfort level for some who would say that, we know that this man knows what we were talking about. And there were so many conversations and deals and engagements that were left midway because of the elections. So for them, it's great to see continuum. They'd be like, okay, we were in the middle of an FTA agreement, and now what happens if the ministers change? Raisina Hill has not changed. We still have Nirmala Sitharaman in North Block, Amit Shah as Home Minister in North Block, External Affairs Minister Jaishankar in South Block, and Defence Minister Raksha Mantri Rajnath Singh in South Block. The North Block, South Block of Raisina Hill remains intact, which means counterparts of these ministers in other countries have that comfort zone now, saying, okay, we can continue the conversation. We can go ahead with the conversations that we are having. In terms of the government also, there's a lot of comfort because there's so much that was left midway, or, almost nearing completion was left because of the elections. Now they know that, okay, that can move forward. So that continuum is important.
So that smoothness too.
And to countries who recently raised concerns saying that India's become too bullish, and the statements that came from the ministry and the minister himself sometimes was not always appreciated by counterparts, like the Russia-Ukraine war and the oil business. Some of them would say that he could have been a little decent about why you're buying oil and why you will not stop. Rather than saying, oh, you take this much oil in a day that we take in a month, and you've done nothing. So I think maybe there'll be some toning down there, some managing ties a little better. But in terms of how you have been taking a very strong position and stance on everything that has to do with India's interests, I think there Dr. Jaishankar will follow through exactly how he was.
Okay. So it will be more or less like the similar lines, but like a bit toned down on specific things. Like
I think only language.
Okay. Yeah, because diplomacy is more about
of being diplomatic.
Of being diplomatic. Yeah. Coming to policy issues, Geeta, let's start with the oath ceremony itself, where this idea of commitment to the government's, neighborhood first policy was reiterated. The swearing in was attended by 7 neighboring countries' leaders. There was Sri Lankan president, there was Maldives president Moitsu, which was much in the news after such strange fiasco. Then there was Bangladesh's Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina, Mauritius Prime Minister, Seychelles Vice President Ahmed Afif, then Nepal Prime Minister Prachanda, then Bhutan Prime Minister. And the ministry said that the leaders' visit wasn't in keeping with the highest priority accorded by India to its neighborhood first policy and Sagar vision. But I was just wondering that, okay, although the dignitaries attended and it worked well for optics, but there are still cracks and fissures in the grouping, if you see. Like, we know that with Moitsu, it's not like everything has been even right now. We don't exist. The Indian troops are not anymore in the Maldives. Similarly, the Nepal Prime Minister is somewhat, to some extent, is seen to be more pro-China than pro-India. And it was also not like a full representation, because Delhi does not recognize the Taliban government in Afghanistan. So there was no representation from there. Similarly, the military rule in Myanmar, nor any representation from Pakistan. So how does this incomplete neighborhood first policy then work?
See, you can't call it incomplete neighborhood first policy, because it is neighborhood first policy. Neighborhood is priority. But for various important foreign policy, diplomatic and political reasons, certain countries were kept out. Imagine if Pakistan would have come and you had the Kashmir attack happening or the Jammu attack happening.
Yeah.
How would that have gone down for Narendra Modi? He already is suffering from the criticism of going to Raivand and then, the Uri attack taking place.
Yeah.
How would he have suffered or handled this? Talks and terror don't go along is something that India stated, although on many, and SARC is a dead block because of that, but in many other multilaterals where there are bigger countries, Pakistan and India are members and they do attend. SCO is an example,
course.
and you will see Prime Minister Modi in Kazakhstan, and you will see Shahbaz Sharif in Kazakhstan.
But this,
so it's dichotomous. It is moving away from stated policy, and yet when it comes to bilateral, there's absolute clarity.
But the dignitaries...
Myanmar again, Anna, how would you call a junta regime where we are seeing persecution? We are looking at many countries, sanctioning Myanmar, and political prisoners still not out.
Yeah.
With the Taliban, there is no way, because we have not officially recognized them. They couldn't have been in the oath-taking ceremony. So these countries are out for a reason. But the larger idea was neighborhood first, where we are looking at the countries that are bordering in the border areas on the northern and the eastern side, and then we are looking at the Sagar diplomacy. So it's neighborhood first plus Sagar diplomacy, which talks about security and growth for all in the region.
Yeah.
And that Sagar diplomacy basically stems from strengthening the maritime areas for India, the Indian Ocean areas for India. And therefore, you saw Maldives, Mauritius, Sri Lanka, Seychelles be a part of it. So the idea was to get all of them involved. Yes, for obvious reasons, many others weren't called. Like in 2014, Nawaz Sharif, Prime Minister Modi invited all the SARC leaders. The 2014 manifesto said we want to strengthen SARC. And then after that, we saw the the attacks and the distancing from Pakistan. Then tried it again, where he went from Afghanistan to Pakistan, and then another attack, which is when a decision was taken that politically it does not work for the BJP to be seen with Pakistan when they've not stopped terrorism. So I think the idea was right. What is most interesting is, and we were discussing this after my return from the Maldives
Yeah.
You should watch
Yeah.
that podcast episode.
Yeah.
Because when I returned and you spoke about me being trolled, I
Yes.
said this very same thing, Anna. I said, tomorrow I went there to report on something very, very important. And I did not say what Moitsu is or is not. I was just trying to
Speak to
project
them.
how important the Maldives is for India.
Yes, yes.
And that whether it's Moitsu or someone else, pro-China, pro-India, we will always try to engage the Maldives. So this boycott Maldives may be for people, but for government, it'll soon not be. What will people who have trolled me do when Modi meets Moitsu again? And here we go.
Yeah.
Not only did they meet, he was actually invited for the oath-taking ceremony of the Prime Minister.
Of course. Yeah.
And if you see the banquet that was hosted,
Right.
he was sitting right beside Prime Minister Modi. Now they can say, okay, it was in order of seniority, presidents first and then prime ministers. So these two presidents could have been sitting on the other side with the president of India, and on the other side, where the vice president of Seychelles and the prime minister of Bangladesh was sitting, could have been sitting on this side. But there was a decision that was made. So that decision is important. And people have to realize that this whole haughty attitude coming in with a lot of trolls, a lot of IT cells working and telling the world what to, what not to, how to treat the Maldives does not work. Take a step back and look at the region. Open the map and look at the region. If the Maldives, if the Chinese make their inroads, which they are, into the Maldives, how difficult it is going to be. So if you talk about challenges, the China challenge is not just the border or not just China challenge in terms of secure supply chains. It's about this, that China is encircling India by making inroads into every country, and rightly so. They have their own
Of course.
strategic plan.
Yeah.
No
Yeah.
country should be telling the other what to, what not to. But what is our counter? This is a good counter.
So does that mean that everything is?
Absolutely not.
Yeah,
It
that's
means
what-
no such thing.
Yeah. So
It does not mean that, Moitsu will suddenly turn against China.
Yeah. No, not turning against China. Of course, that's like a huge decision. But the fact still exists, right? That Indian troops don't exist.
They never did there for military reasons. That's the whole point. When they didn't for military reasons, and they were there for medical or emergency, which is what we say, right?
Yeah.
And they were there for emergency medical reasons, right? The fact that Moitsu ran an entire campaign saying that MDP is sold out, that they're sold out, that there's military presence, that they're going to, that how dare the Maldives allow this to happen, have military presence in the Maldives, and then when you look back and you see that's not what
That's not-
happened.
Yeah. Yeah.
They were just there, and he gave such staggering numbers that they're in thousands.
Yeah. That was
Which is
also-
not the case.
Exactly.
So he ran a false propaganda with an India out campaign and has come to power. But such is the power of these narratives as well, that people bought into it and they really think. And it's not just presidential elections. We thought, okay, now they'll open their eyes after the whole economy is crumbling down, and tourists have boycotted the Maldives. And look at the parliamentary elections. They
Yeah,
swept. We thought
they
MDP will do well, but and I actually said that.
Yes, you did,
I said that if they get
Now they-
parliament, then it'll become very difficult for Modi.
Now they
But he
can't-
swept.
Yeah.
He swept, which means people continue to believe this, and the Chinese have made inroads to the extent that now today, China tourists from China are the topmost, and then come the various other countries, and India has lost out because everybody's saying boycott the Maldives. But boycotting has not helped India in the case of bridging those gaps and ties.
Right. Yeah.
This will. This meeting. You have to keep engaging to say, we're not the bad ones.
So, like you said very rightly, that you have to keep engaging. Then, like I remember there's this expert, Prakash Kere, and he said that, if you want to be a global leader, you have to first have regional dominance, right? And here we are not even engaging. I understand everything that, there's a military takeover so you don't have Aung San Suu Kyi in Myanmar, or in Pakistan, you have like a strained relations. But ultimately,
That's not our doing. Anna, sometimes you have to realize, is America a superpower or not? Tell
of
me.
course,
It is, right?
yeah,
So in the region, how does America look? It looks great.
yeah,
It has ties with everybody.
yeah,
But does it have ties with Cuba? Does it have ties with Venezuela? In the region, not so far away. Does it have ties with these countries? You just because you want regional dominance before becoming a superpower does not mean that you can always have ties with anybody, even if you disagree with the ideology and the thought process. And you will be on the wrong side of history many times, more than not, if you align yourself with governments you don't believe in. That also shows regional dominance and power, that India has the power to say no to these countries.
yeah,
That we are not succumbing to pressure to say, okay, we need to engage. I'll give you another example which we discussed when Russia-Ukraine war was happening. US is a superpower.
yeah,
You see diminishing power when you don't have the power to say no. When did that happen? That happened when they stopped taking, they sanctioned Russia. They couldn't take oil from Russia.
yeah,
And all these other countries who were dependent, European countries who were dependent on Russia, looked at US because US said, no, 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 bear with us, honor our sanctions. We'll try getting oil for you. Who did they turn to? They turned to Venezuela, a country they have sanctioned for decades,
decades, yeah, yeah,
because they no longer have the power to say no. That is
correct,
diminishing power. So we have the
yes,
power right now in the region to say no.
yeah.
And that's not a bad idea.
Then, I mean, this entire idea. Speaking of Russia-Ukraine war, much is always said about India's neutrality stance, right? So, but then it's also compared with.
It's not a neutral stand, actually.
No, of course. That's what I'm saying. I'm coming at in the sense that if you see, I mean, there are critics who say that if you see all these major global powers like the US or China, they, especially like if you talk about in matters with the ongoing wars, for example, so they don't have like a neutral stance, and they also say that the BJP used to blame the Congress government, the Nehru government, saying that okay, you had a neutral stance, but they are more or less also following the same path. Like in the Russia-Ukraine war, the positioning enabled India to buy oil from Russia, at discounted prices, of course. But like if you see the Israel war, India had abstained, in the early months, had abstained in the vote on a resolution in the United Nations General Assembly calling for a humanitarian
You have
truce.
to decide whether if you're going to be the right side or the wrong side of history over here.
Okay. And how do you assess that?
You see civilian casualty and you take a call. It's as simple as that.
Okay.
Over here, I think people say there can be no proportion. Like, a proportionate or disproportionate war does not exist if it's war.
Yeah.
But if you're fighting an entire area where people can't defend themselves, then it's a one-sided one. And so the Indian government abstained is because they could not vote against.
Yeah.
But they didn't vote for because the resolutions did not condemn Hamas. And America voted against the
Yeah.
resolution, again saying the same thing.
That's what I'm saying.
But
That
then the argument over here is, if this document did not condemn Hamas and they were only seeking ceasefire. So the fact is that they abstained a resolution that specifically called for ceasefire and nothing else, right?
yeah.
My counter argument is that if you really wanted a condemnation, you could have had two resolutions, one on ceasefire and one on condemnation, and gone ahead with that. Why the hypocrisy of the West? Why follow the hypocrisy of the West, where they wanted Israel to continue doing what it is doing because they thought that was priority, to take out Hamas at the cost of so many civilian deaths, that they actually made this argument that, but this document does not condemn Hamas. The West Asian countries or Arab leaders were focused on ceasefire. Some of them, and there's so much of politics to do with Hamas, some countries support Hamas, so they wouldn't have condemned it. you could have just come up with another resolution and passed that. Because they're not part of the P5, those West Asian
Yeah.
countries or Arab leaders.
Yeah.
So you could have just come up with another document condemning Hamas, and one that said it took so much. It took them to go to ICJ, so on and so forth, to really get the world to say, okay, this has to stop, that this must stop. So over here, I question the position. On Russia-Ukraine war also, the position was very clear
Yeah.
that they were going to stand by Russia. And I don't think it would have been vastly different if it were Congress-led UPA government. I think the language would have been a little different in terms of saying this is not an era of war. Much later, they would have maybe said it much earlier on. Okay. But they would have still stood by Russia. There is no way that we would leave Russia at a time when you have Pakistan-China nexus happening. You have Russia having now conversations with Pakistan, which was never seen before. Why? Because this entire group of nations stands against the West. And for China, this entire alignment is very important. So at such a juncture, when you have Chinese at our doorstep, to unfriend Russia would not have been the best idea.
Yeah.
So there are challenges. There are a lot of challenges. China will remain a challenge. Economy will remain a challenge. Getting the FTAs through will remain a challenge.
Yeah.
But then we also have to see whether the promises will be kept. You see, during the poll, Anna, there were so many things that they said. They spoke about UNSC membership, which is not practical to
coming at
yeah.
Yeah.
And POK. They said we'll take back POK.
Yeah. I mean,
which is not practical.
So this is taking back POK is a narrative that you see in every sort of elections.
But more so this time. More so this time, where you had cabinet ministers saying we will take back POK.
Rajnath
Before
Singh.
that, it used to always be about they claim this, they're doing this in Kashmir, but POK is an integral part of it. But this whole aggressive posturing on taking back POK and Gwadar and Kachetevu.
Yes.
So there is there has to be some toning down, and reality needs to set it. All these can be resolved bilaterally and should be resolved bilaterally.
Right.
But the use of terrorism as an instrument of state policy by Pakistan will and should continue to remain a concern.
Yeah.
And there is a price to pay for that.
Yeah.
We've lost lives here. There's a price to pay for that, and that price is not engaging Pakistan.
Just a slight nugget on that, because
and also it's sad because it's the military and the establishment, not the people of Pakistan.
Yeah.
In fact, we've had some bold decisions, the civilian government trying to make a move, and that has not moved forward because the establishment then takes over and we see some attack or the other.
True. Just a slight nugget, as I was saying, we actually have like an entire episode on the practicality of retaking POK, which we did in our podcast called In Our Defense. So please do watch and listen to that. It's a wonderful episode done by our colleagues Shivarur and Dev Goswami. So please do watch that. And speaking of challenges, like you said, the UNSC, because we had like an entire episode in the early phases of Geeta's World where we discussed this India having a permanent seat in the United Nations Security Council. And multiple reports that I have read is like everybody is saying that if Prime Minister Modi in its 3.0 phase is able to do that, it's going to be like wonderful. But
China is a major stumbling block. It's not possible unless and until there's an absolute overhaul of the United Nations, and countries actually come and say, well, I don't think we agree with this. I don't think United Nations is the forum now to deal with situations.
Right, yeah.
Because you're not representative of the real world that exists today.
Yeah. That's what I was about to ask, that how probable or realistic does it seem? Because, you remember how essential, we talked about it, how essential it was for the BJP to get this seat, because there was this whole fake narrative of blaming the Nehru government for for this, that always made rounds, and which we clarified that it's still alleged and debated that in the early 1950s, then Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru, he did not seize several, opportunities for India to join the UNSC as a permanent member, and Nehru's critics then and now accuse him of sacrificing India's
He's been criticized
national.
for a lot in terms of India's foreign policies.
Yeah.
Much of it is not true.
But on the contrary,
And
if you
a lot of it has to do with the practicalities of those times,
right.
the realities of those times.
Right. So, I just, if you can clarify on this once again, whether we were actually offered, if we were offered
So
the
there
seat.
is no document. There's no document
Yeah.
that we can, see and confirm that yes, there was an offer that was made. But yes, it has been reported, and it has also been reported by some saying that at that point in time, and
In 1950s.
yes,
Yeah.
India did not think that it was there to be able to handle the responsibility, especially by riling China, which is right there at the border.
Yeah.
So there were many realities of the time that were factored in, but we do not really know whether if that
Yeah.
offer was in fact made or not.
Also, one important point that you had made last time, that UN at that point hadn't recognized the People's Republic of China.
Yeah, it was Taiwan,
It was Taiwan.
Republic of China.
Right, right. So, with this in mind, the recognition was probably for the Republic of China, which is Taiwan. So, anyway, moving on, just speaking of China, because that's important, it's an age old question, will Modi 3.0 be able to limit China's encroachments into Indian territory if we talk about the Indo-Pacific region? Because just mentioning this, if we look at the BJP's election manifesto this time, there was this only one mention of China in the context of taking a pledge to accelerate the development of robust infrastructure along the two countries' borders. So it's mostly about enhancing border, infrastructure, bolstering
But that
defense
acts as a
capabilities.
deterrence. That acts as a deterrence. I tell you why.
Okay.
Because if you see the border infrastructure between India and China, the Chinese border infrastructure can get the most advanced heavy vehicles right to our doorstep.
Yeah.
But the Indian infrastructure is such that it cannot. In parts, we have become better. So, yes, it is a priority area. It should be done to act as a deterrence. But is that the only thing that is to be done to counter China? No. There's a lot that needs to be done to counter China. Firstly, becoming an economic power. You cannot fight the economic might of China unless and until you become one yourself.
If you speak about trade, China is the biggest
Yes,
trading partner of India.
So, and of the United States of
Of the
America.
United States, yes.
So,
Yeah.
so I'm just saying that you cannot counter China just merely by building roads. There is a need to have an entire plan with economics kept in mind, and that's not just economic growth of India, of the region where you can play an important part, because that's where your might comes in. You just said regional power. You become a regional power by doing just that. And when you do that, you will see China maybe look at India differently, or either take a very tough posture because they don't like the growth of any country, and that could challenge their supremacy in the region.
Yeah, right. Just to end this, Geeta, we have spoken of a lot, many, because this is the election year. So you think we should also address this about a possible change in certain, political structure of certain countries like the US, or
Oh,
now
yes, it's going to be very interesting.
Yeah,
UK, France, US.
France, yeah.
Yes.
And France is like very latest. It's and it was actually, I mean, we have seen Modi's and Macron's romance, like it's very palpable. But let's first talk about the US. Like, Donald Trump has more probability of coming back to power.
We don't
So
know
you-
that.
Probability,
it
I
is very rare
said.
for an incumbent to
I said
lose in
probability.
in the United States.
Yeah,
But
you're right.
in the popularity rating, Trump is ahead of Biden. It doesn't help matters that in the D-Day commemoration, event celebrations, we have visuals of Biden, Macron, and the First Lady of the United States of America
Oh,
looking, and then suddenly Biden just turns.
does. Yeah, I know.
And then Macron did not know what to do. So
And then
he
he
also turned. And then the two ladies also turned. It is the most, I'm sorry, but I watched that
But it's
video
not
on
tone
loop.
deaf. It's just like what we saw.
And you're like, this is going to be watched all over. And, and he's done this so many
I
times.
know.
So,
I know.
coming back to your question, it's going to be interesting.
Yeah.
No matter who comes to power in which country, I think Keir Starmer will be something we'll have to look at, because if Labour returns to the UK, we'll have more questions on human rights
Yeah. Yeah.
than the Conservatives cared for.
Yes.
If
In France?
in France, it'll be the other way around, because
Yeah.
the far right will be
Yeah.
looking at
Yeah,
coming to
because
power. And in the United States of America, it'll be great for Modi either way, but greater if it's Trump. Or not, maybe, because
Greater?
greater.
Okay.
The rare leader who Trump got along with was Prime Minister Modi.
Oh,
He
yeah.
only has very few friends.
Oh, I remember with this entire
Globally.
JCB episode happening in India.
So
Oh, yeah.
but the only thing is that he is fickle, and he can be quite. He can take one small issue and make a big thing out of it, like Harley Davidson's. We did not cut the tax import duties, and the entire trade deal was held hostage to those 80 odd bikes, expensive bikes that some people buy. 80. That's the sale
Yeah.
in India. 80 to 100. For that, you billions of dollars. So we'll have to wait and see. But he largely has been very, very upbeat about India, and particularly about Prime Minister Modi.
So, if you talk about the Prime Minister, like it promising a new chapter of big decisions for India. So, considering it's a coalition government, considering Modi has been actually cut to size, it's not like a brute majority. So, you think there are major decisions inside that could probably be
I
hindered?
think there are major decisions that will be made, not hindered.
Okay.
Because I do think that, even coalition partners over here
Okay.
are not going to do anything that will hinder the interests of India. But on major deals, if there are questions to be asked, like, if the opposition starts asking questions on a defense deal, then the coalition partners will also be pressured from their states to, seek some answers.
Yeah.
So it's not going to be riding roughshod over everyone, including the opposition. There would be maybe some answering to do. But by and large, I think nobody's going to work against the interests of India. And in that, if there are decisions taken, those will follow through smoothly.
Got it. Yeah. So I think we'll put an end to the conversation, Geeta. Thank you so much. I was looking forward to this episode because it's always very interesting to discuss your own country.
Yeah.
Yeah. And its foreign policy because, in this podcast, 93 episodes, we have been discussing so much that now I think I have getting a grip over not only India's politics but India's foreign policies as well. So I hope to all of those who tuned in and stayed till the very end. Also, please listen to the other podcasts that we do, like for example, In Our Defense, and also follow Geeta's World. And
India Today Global.
yes, yes, India Today Global. And we'll be back next week. Till then, keep. Also, Geeta, just one thing, sorry. The last episode, the Mexico one, we got like a flurry of comments, and I was reading through all of them, and many were very not constructive, but they were saying that we did not cover a few points. So I think it's not, we are taking that in cognizance. We are not like, if you're just commenting and we are not taking that in cognizance. If you felt it was lacking in somewhere, I think we'll take note of that and we'll try to improve that. But there were also, it was just not that, but there were also, so-called, appreciations. So thank you for that.
Thank you. And yes, we'll take note of
Yeah.
your questions, comments, and maybe in the later future, when there is something to be discussed, incorporate all those.
Yeah.
comments as
Also,
well.
if you want to like suggest something, you can, suggest that in the comments or just write to us, which is pods@indiatoday.com. And there's a number which is 8588 966 996. So thank you so much, and we'll be back next week.